All right, good morning, everyone. I want to start by recognizing those who contributed to this important cold case arrest. And on behalf of the Orange County Sheriff's Office, Sheriff John Mina, and on behalf of FDLE, Lee Massey over here. So this is why we're here. Detective Cage of our Special Victims Unit has arrested a man dubbed the Woodline Rapist. This man committed at least 2 sexual batteries in Orlando and Orange County approximately 19 years ago. And detectives with both OPD and the Orange County Sheriff's Office are already reviewing other similar cases to determine if they have been linked or if there is a link. But I want to add something else that is not really the purpose of this media availability today, is the fact that due to Detective Cage's work, we have determined that there is a need for us to hold on to sexual battery evidence longer than what is normally expected. Therefore, we're going to hold on to our evidence for 50 years moving forward. As technology continues to improve, as technology continues to evolve, we see the potential here for other cases to be solved and obviously to bring justice to the survivors affected by these crimes. So with that said, I'll turn it over now to Sheriff Mina, who will say some words.
Thanks, Chief. We are very glad to be here today to announce the arrest of this habitual rapist. In the Orange County case in February of 2002, Harris brutally attacked the victim as she was walking to her apartment. He threw her down to the ground, told her to shut up, threatened her with a knife, and raped her twice. And we know the memory of that night has haunted the victim for all of these years, and especially since he had not been brought to justice until now. So we are very thankful for the partnerships we have with our other law enforcement agencies and the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, their relationship with Parabon Nanolabs, who really helped solve both these cases for the Orange County Sheriff's Office and the Orlando Police Department. The techniques they use brought justice to the victims. And we know, there could be other victims out there, but we want to let people know that, we hear our victims, we start by believing, and we never stop investigating these cases. And we'll use any technology and techniques and means necessary to bring these folks to justice. When the detectives in our case made the phone call to the victim to let her know that the suspect was behind bars, she was extremely thankful that he would never hurt anyone again. So again, we're so glad that he is behind bars, and so glad that we have these great partnerships. And I think I'll turn it over to Lieutenant Chisari now.
Thank you, Sheriff. Thank you, Chief. Good morning. I'm Lieutenant Frank Chisari with the Violent Crime Section of our Criminal Investigations Division. Dwight Arthur Harris has kept a violent secret for nearly 20 years. Thanks to the tenacious efforts of our detectives here at OPD and our partners at the Sheriff's Office, we have now determined that he attacked and sexually battered at least 2 women in 2002, and there may be more, as our detectives have already submitted an additional sex battery cold case from Orlando for testing. Harris has been given the nickname Woodline Rapist by our detectives because of how he attacked his victims. He would wait for a woman to return home alone to her apartment after a night out. As she unlocked her door, he would attack her, drag her to a nearby wooded area just past the tree line, and sexually batter her. Again, Harris has managed to keep these attacks a secret, all while living a relatively normal life here in the city of Orlando. However, recently, with the help of FDLE's Genealogy Investigations team, its partnership with Parabon Nanolabs, and new techniques to study DNA evidence, detectives were finally able to identify Harris as the perpetrator and give his victims the justice they deserve. Harris now faces 2 counts of sexual battery with a deadly weapon or physical force. Our detectives and those with the Sheriff's Office are already actively reviewing other cold cases to see if any of those could have been committed by the Woodline Rapist. We'll take your questions if you have any.
Is there a certain area where these specifics happen? Sorry if you are.
Central Florida area, apartment complexes, normally on the there was scattered a few of them throughout the Central Florida area. I believe he had one on the east side and on the west side.
2 on the east side, and there's 3 on the west side,
Yes.
I believe.
East of where exactly, or?
East Orlando area and then the West Orlando area, apartment complexes there.
Is the 2011 case the most recent case he's linked to?
That's the most recent one we know of, and that's an Orange County case.
Can you talk about just the technological advancements that led to all of this?
Yeah, so it's simple things like back in the early 2000s when these cases first came up, they weren't able to separate DNA. If there was multiple DNA samples that came off of a test, they couldn't separate and figure out who was who. So now we have technology that they can separate. They can figure that out. Just as far as being able to build a better genetic profile and match it against large databases, the databases have grown. So as more people get put into the database, you have more potential hits. So you got to think in 20 years, how many more people have we added to this database? And it's not only with new and growing technology, but you also just, based on sheer numbers, as time goes on, you're going to have more people added to a database of DNA, and we're able to pull from that.
So it's at least 3 cases he's tied to at the moment?
We believe so, yeah.
Any kind of, I know the victims are obviously horrible what happened. No kind of reaction, are they? I'm sure they're happy about these arrests.
Oh yeah, we've had victims. Victims reached out. They're extremely happy that they're receiving justice. They're survivors of sexual battery, and they can finally face their perpetrator and know that he's going to be locked away.
How many cases do you all believe that he may be tied to?
We don't have an exact number. We think that he's probably tied to more. We know that it's very common for victims of sexual battery, sexual assault to not come forward. And so I think part of this coming here and putting it out to the media is, we want people to come forward when they've survived a sexual battery, a sexual assault, and report it to the police, and make sure that you see that we have victims coming forward now to tell us that they've been attacked, and it helps other survivors of sexual battery come forward. So that's kind of the goal here.
And if I may add to that, so obviously you can imagine you're having to relive that whole experience, but we're very fortunate to have the support organizations present here in Central Florida that can help the victims go through that horrible experience of having to relive how they were victimized, right? And then participating in the judicial process. But the fact that we have the technology that now supports the ability to identify offenders and tie to individuals that can be held accountable for those actions, I think it's the biggest thing that we want to deliver, the message that we want to deliver today. And for those who are out there who may think that they may have gotten away with something, the potential is that in the future, they may be identified also.
Thank you.
If I can just continue on that line of thought, you're going to hold on to evidence for 50 years now. How long were you holding it prior to now? Is this only in sex assault cases? And how many cases will this potentially affect?
So whenever a case is disposed and we receive notification that the evidence is no longer needed, then that evidence tended to go away. But we did find that there's always an opportunity for something else to come up, for something else to maybe available or able to identify an offender. So we determined that the chances are that there may have been some cases in the past that are no longer in our possession, that are no longer able for us, or we're able to then use those cases to potentially assist with an investigation. We don't want that to happen again. And although 50 years may sound like a long time, the fact that we can hold on to these cases and as the technology continues to improve, there's always a chance that we may be able to identify something else that maybe we're not even thinking about today. So with that said, that's why we decided to extend our hold time for these cases for 50 years. Might be modified in the future, but right now our policy says 50 years for all cases.
So not just sex assault?
Sexual assault cases.
Okay, and does this require, are you going to have to expand storage? Is there any?
No, there are obviously, they continue to occur in our community, but the number of cases versus the storage that you need to hold on to those cases is not that significant in the scheme of things. And we're very blessed to have a very, very large property and evidence section to hold as many cases as we want. What we want to do, though, is prevent these cases from ever happening, to educate our community on what they can do to protect themselves, but when they're victimized, to send a message, and a clear message, that if you commit an offense, the chances are that the technology will continue to improve and will identify you in the future.
So Chief Rolón, how long was the hold before?
So again, it all dependent on the cases, and Detective Cage will be able to expand on this further. Once we receive notification that, hey, this evidence is no longer needed, then really technically we could have disposed of the cases, but I'll let the detective explain it further.
So, laws have changed in the past, 20, 30 years. There was a time where the statute of limitations for a sexual battery was, I believe 7 years. Laws have changed since then, and as long as the victim reports that within a certain time frame, there is no longer a statute of limitation. So simple laws like that have obviously affected that. So our policy has become to reflect that a lot better.
Was there an average amount then, just to paint a picture of how big of a difference 50 years may have been? Was it looking like some cases it may have been 20 years? Was it more like 7 once at the time when the statute?
It's a case-by-case basis. It just depends on what the actual charge would have been when the offense was committed. There were certain sexual battery offenses that did have a lifetime statute of limitation, which we still, for the most part, do hold.
So now you're just gonna do, just to clarify, 50 for all cases, no matter what?
Correct.
Sex battery,
Yeah,
sex
sexual
assault
battery.
cases, yes.
What spawned this, and how do you think it's going to affect cases in the future, having that much longer of time?
I'll be honest with you, I'm going to give credit to Greg Fox. He's the one who was probing to see what happened with 2 particular cases that came to the attention of the media, and it allowed us to go back and sit down and talk about our cases. And when the question was asked, hey, how long do we keep them? The answers that you've been provided is what we had at the table. And we said, why not just hold them for a lot longer? Our deputy chief with the Investigative Bureau, talking to the investigative staff, suggested 50 years. At first I thought, that's a very long time, but in reality, it's not. And technology can improve so much in that period of time that we decided 50 years is the way we're going to go with it.
Yeah, the chief said it future-proofs us. There was no way to foresee the advancements in technology when original policies and everything like that were written. So you figure 50 years, it makes up for any advancements in technology that we have in the future as well.
When it comes to Harris, did you guys arrest him? Was he already in jail for something else?
He was arrested for our warrants for these related crimes. He was arrested about 2 weeks ago by the Orlando Police Department's fugitive unit.
Yeah, he was living like we said, he was living a normal life, family, had a regular job, just as if it never happened. Yeah.
Did he have any remorse, or did he confess to any of this?
He immediately asked for a lawyer.
Yeah.
When you repeatedly got locked out, I'm sorry, Mr. Harris.
I said he was living a normal life. He had a family, he had a regular job, just as if it never happened.
Okay, and what's he accused of? What did you link him to?
What did we link him to?
Yes.
Sex battery with a deadly weapon or physical force. Yeah, he's been arrested.
And just to clarify too, of the 2 cases where he's being charged with so far, what years were those? Were those the ones?
2002 to 2003.
Okay.
Yeah.
And if you want specific information about the Orange County case, we have the lieutenant
Yes.
here who can answer those questions.
Yeah, is he able to speak to that?
How y'all doing? Yes, besides the 2002 case that we worked in conjunction with the Orlando Police Department, we do have a 2011 case, and we have reached out to that young lady victim, and we're speaking to her about the case and seeing how she wants to move forward with the case. So we are in talks with her right now.
But you were able to tie his DNA to that case as well?
Yes. Oh, no, I'm sorry. No, we don't have DNA in that case, but we have other investigative elements that has tied him to that case. Absolutely.
So was there old DNA that was put into the system? Was he just rearrested? What triggered this?
Well, I'll let OPD speak on their case on that. We did work in conjunction with them, but they're the lead on that.
So I had an opportunity to speak to the detective, Detective Mike Moreschi at the time, who investigated these cases in 2002. He had told me that these were some of the cases that in his tenure with the sex crimes unit have always bothered him. He always felt like this was always, a series of cases that was left unsolved. He had put together a case study on this. It was linked back then in 2003 as having common DNA. There was just no name attached to that DNA profile. So he initiated a genealogy investigation with Florida Department of Law Enforcement. and it just evolved over time, and they were able to give us an investigative lead that led us to Mr. Harris.
Can you talk about some of his prior arrests that put him in the DNA database in the first place?
He actually his DNA was not in any database. That tip that I was referring to from FDLE, from that we were able to go get a search warrant for his DNA, and we served that search warrant, and that's actually how we obtained his DNA.
Sorry. Can you talk about the genealogical, like what the process was like for FDLE and
We have someone right here for that.
Talk about that.
Right to the very end, and then. My name is Lee Massey, M-A-S-S-I-E, Special Agent in charge with Florida Department of Law Enforcement, the Orlando Regional Office. And with me is Ashley Garner, who's our chief over our biology section. Genetic genealogy works. One of these investigators mentioned to the question about did you find his DNA in a database. Genetic genealogy works with those individuals whose DNA profile is not in the database that's checked against it. So what happens is that DNA, a sample of that DNA is then sent to Parabon, and Parabon then works, and I'm not going to get into the deep science for obvious reasons, but the fact of the matter is that a DNA strand checked by our lab will work under a certain profile. It's called an STR. When it's sent to the Parabon lab, that the sample that's sent to Parabon is then changed to a different profile. It's called an SNP or a SNP. And then what that ability provides is the opportunity to check that DNA for different characteristics than the FDLE lab checks it for, much like hair color, eye color, maybe ethnicity, origin of the individual. So what happens is genetic genealogy is a tool. It's part of an investigative process. So it works collaboratively with the science, along with a significant analytical component and an investigative stuff, which is what these guys are very good at. So as Parabon produces this profile of ethnicity, hair color, eye color, it comes back to the genetic genealogy team, and then they start to review news events, different incidents that took place during the time frame of the crime we're looking at, and then through an analytical process, they try and build investigative leads. So based off of all of the information that as a result of the genetic profile that's created by Parabon, we create these investigative leads, and then what these analysts do is they start taking the leads, looking at names and associates, and they start putting this profile into like the Ancestry.com or the 23andMe, and they start looking for associations, things that can make sense. So it's a series of events. It's a very laborious effort through analysis, and then at times, the detective mentioned Mike Moreschi. Mike Moreschi retired from Orlando Police Department. He came to the FDLE for a while, so he brought some of these cases with him, and he was assigned to our genetic genealogy team. They take the investigative leads that's been created, and they start to build a case. So they'll start with a very large audience, and they'll begin to hone that audience down, working collaboratively with the investigators, saying, we need some DNA samples. Can you go out and find them? You heard him talk about getting a search warrant to get a DNA sample of Mr. Harris. That's that final step that then allows us to get that DNA sample. It goes back to our DNA lab, and then they then can confirm that that's a match. So that's a very short discussion about a very complicated process, but hopefully, I know some of you all had sat in a very deep, high-level conversation years ago with Lori Napolitano when GGI was created. It talks about the more science of it, but does that sort of answer a little bit of the process of how that works?
So is it kind of like a reverse engineering in a way?
Yeah, okay, we'll go with yes. I'm not an engineer, but we'll go with reverse engineering.
Because there's a lot of analysis that has to go into it.
A ton. So think about it this. Genetic genealogy is a tool, much like a bunch of other tools that investigators use to solve cases. So it's another tool that provides what we like to call in law enforcement investigative leads. Then it's incumbent on the investigators to do what they're experts at doing investigations. So they go out and do their thing, but they do it in collaboration with the analysts who are saying, if you can get me this, then through analysis, I can do this. And then it goes back. The analysts say, we've done this, and the investigators say, now we can do that. So it's just a very hand-in-glove approach, using science, using technology, relying on our labs and our experts in our lab fields to do what they can do through the science piece, and then ultimately we come to this conclusion, and this is what every law enforcement professional wants. We want closure on a case for a victim who has had to live for almost 20 years without having that.
Can you say how you narrowed it down, just from the characteristics through ancestry DNA? Like, was it, one of his relatives in the...
That's what happens is you start to find family trees and then you start working those profiles down. And I'm not even going to pretend to give you the specifics on it, but you start looking at various levels of connectivity or relationship, and you start honing those down to where those relationships or those leads become more and more closely related to the DNA sample we're working off of. Does that make sense? So you may have somebody that's has a very few characteristics consistent with the sample we have, but you have others that have more, and then from that you get a new target and you continue to work that. Now I will tell you this, you've heard him talk about the various Parabon companies that we work with. There are options when you log on to do your 23andMe or Ancestry.com that gives you the opportunity to say you either will or will not allow your sample to go into a database that law enforcement can use. The population that we are able to access is a smaller population than the general public could access if you just put your sample into the mix. Because some folks have said we do not want to allow our profile to be accessible by law enforcement. So we encourage anybody that may be thinking about submitting their sample because they want to learn about their family tree to at least consider allowing that option for law enforcement to utilize, because ultimately this is where we're all trying to get. And I believe the majority of the population wants to see closure to these types of things, and they want to see bad guys held accountable.
Detectives, what was the reaction from these two women almost 20 years later that you made an arrest in these cases?
I got to speak with them both over the phone and one in person. They both thought that this day would never have come. They thought this was cases that were going to be forever be unsolved.
How good did it feel to deliver that news?
They were ecstatic. So ecstatic they're using some words I probably can't use right now.
And for Detective Qureshi, I mean, this is...
Oh, he was absolutely ecstatic as well. He thought also this was going to be forever a cold case. He didn't think that this was ever going to be solved.
How much time could he be facing?
I believe for this is up to life imprisonment and be a sex offender as well.
And just to clarify, he's not known to you guys, he's never faced any charges before?
Correct, yeah, and, except for the one incident with Orange County, I don't think he had any other interaction with law enforcement.
And he was also not known to these being victims, right?
Correct, these were completely unknown perpetrator attacks.
Anything else? We're good?
Everyone, thank you very much.